Okay, thank you again for joining us. Today we're going to talk about peak flows. Ashley and I are going to tag team this. She'll start off and then I'll pick up when we get to current conditions in the forecast. But we're going to go through again exactly what our peak flows represent, how to interpret the graphics. We made a couple small changes. I know we said we wouldn't do that, but there was a little confusion with the graphics that were on there last month, and we wanted to provide some more information. We're then going to go through the current soil snowpack conditions and the peak flow forecasts, and then talk a little bit about the upcoming weather. So I'm going to slide out of the way here and let Ashley take over for a moment.
Hi, this is Ashley. So I'm just going to go quickly over. Most of you, if you were on last month, have seen a lot of this stuff, but just a quick review. So what is a peak flow forecast? These forecasts are the maximum mean daily flow during the snowmelt period. So typically April through July is our forecast period for these. They're probabilistic forecasts. And an important note is their regulated flow. They account for reservoirs and diversions. If we have the operations, we use them. If we don't have planned operations, we use a set of assumptions based on previous operations. These forecasts are only forecasts of the magnitude of the peak and not the timing. And we do these for about 70 points, and this year we're doing them twice a month. So the first of the month, and then we've been making mid-month updates. The other thing we added a few years ago was instantaneous peak flow forecasts. These are just a relationship based on between the mean daily flow and the instantaneous flow. We don't have these instantaneous forecasts for all points. They're only used for points where there's a good correlation between the instantaneous peak and the daily peak. So in areas where there's heavy rain or there aren't instantaneous peaks available, we don't provide these instantaneous peak flow forecasts. All right, so excuse me, there's two main places to find our peak flow forecasts, and Brenda went over this last month, so we'll just go quickly through it. There's a peak flow map, and then there's also a peak flow list, and on the screen there's the links to both of these. To get to the map, the peak flow map from our website, there's two ways you can do it. So you can click on the rivers drop-down menu and you get the listing that's highlighted in the red box on the bottom. And there's two options, the peak flow map and the peak flow list. So you can select them from the bottom of the web page or from the drop-down menu under rivers. Here's a reminder of what the map looks like. And there's a few things to highlight on the map. On the top, you can see the forecast date. So you can know the map was made based on which forecast. So for this example was from last month, but the forecasts that are on the map were from March 7th. And being plotted on the map are these peak flow probability indicators, the colored diamonds that you see. And you can see that the scale on the right-hand side, so these are indicators of whether the forecasts are hitting some sort of critical level at these points or reaching the flood flow. So if it's green, there's a low probability that that point's going to reach flood flow. If it's red, there's a high probability that somewhere in the forecast distribution, or actually greater than 50%, that point will hit flood flow. You can also zoom into certain areas on the map via the drop-down menu on the left-hand side. And then you can also hover over the point to see the name. And then if you click on that point, you'll get the peak flow graph. Here's an example of the list. This list has actually been sorted by the peak flow probability indicator, or PI. So it's an example of what the list looks like, and then also an example of how you can sort if you're only concerned about forecast points that might be of concern. So, and you can see based on these colored diamonds where those sites or the peak flow forecast is falling in the distribution of hitting flood flow. So at LaBarge, there's a 50% chance that it's going to hit flood flow, and then for the rest of those points, a 10% chance that it will hit its flood flow. All right, so Greg mentioned that we made some changes to the peak flow graphic. So last month we explained this graphic in the webinar, and a lot of the stuff on the new graphic is similar, but there are some changes. We apologize for making the changes, but there was some concern that there might be some confusion with this default graph. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to explain the new graphic that we're using. So this is an example of the new graphic. And we'll just, the first thing to start with is there's now two different plots for both the mean daily forecast and the instantaneous forecast. So you can select whether you want to see a plot of the mean daily forecast or the instantaneous forecast on the top. You can see that the green bar is similar to the plot, the old plot. That's the forecasted probabilities. And then new on this plot is the shading in the background that also represents that forecast probability range. And the shading is connected to the most recent forecast distribution range. The forecast issuance date is still on the bottom. And we still have flood flow and bank full flow on the plot. And then also the pink line and the blue line, these are the record peak and the minimum peak of record. And then the orange shading is the normal time of peak. And then lastly, the blue line on the bottom is the current observed daily stream flow. So that's the hydrograph for this year from 2014. So you can see where the current stream flow is in relationship to the peak flow forecast as we move through the runoff period. And then there's two options on the top. One of them is called record year data, and if you select this, you get plots of the min and max year hydrographs, and I'll show you an example of this in a second. And then the second one is called yearly peaks, and if you select this, you can get a plot of the historical peaks. So here's an example of what the plot would look like if you selected that record year data. And you can see what it does is it plots the hydrographs from the year of the maximum peak and the year of the minimum peak. So that pink line would be the hydrograph from 1984, and the blue line is the minimum year, which was 1989. So in the legend, you can see the actual peak flow values and what year they occurred. And then lastly, if you select the yearly peaks option, it plots all of the historical peaks onto that plot for you, so you can see the magnitude of them and where they landed in terms of the runoff period. So those are the other two options that are now available with this graphic. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Greg.
Great, thanks, Ashley. That was a really excellent description. So we'll go into the current conditions now, and then we'll take a look at the peak flow forecast that we have. If you recall, we have a couple areas where we've got really good soil moisture. We had really good soil moisture. You've seen this map many times. Coming into the winter season, these areas that are circled are also the areas where we have an impressive snowpack. So we have two things working in our favor for higher than average runoff in these places, and even potential bank full, maybe a few sites that might actually have a flood threat associated with them. But these are the areas where we're watching quite a bit and expecting high runoff in. This next image here is also a representation of the snow, and this is the snow as our hydrologic model here at the River Forecast Center sees it. This is the snow. It's basically a percent of the 30-year model calibration average. Matches up really pretty well with the SNOTEL sites, and I'll show that in a moment. But you can see again in the Green River Basin headwaters up above Fontenelle in the Wyoming Range and the Wind River Range, 175% or greater snow in that area. Also a little bit extending down into the Bear River Basin and into the Logan River Basin. And again, from the upper Yampa into some of the Colorado River headwaters, as well as some of the Gunnison River Basin headwaters. A pretty impressive snowpack. Elsewhere, we're closer to average, and in many areas, especially the eastern part of the Duchesne and the San Juan Basin, the model is indicating a below average snowpack situation. So if we take a look at some of the forecasts on the upper left, I've got a bunch of information on each one of these, but I have the graphic on the upper left that Ashley referred to that shows the latest forecast, and this is for the Green River at LaBarge. And on that one, you can actually see where the plot is. The 50% forecast is above the flood flow. So we're showing a little bit better than a 50% probability of reaching the flood flow at LaBarge. And this is all based on a future expectation of the long term of just climate conditions. I have on the right a little table that shows the average flow as well as last year's flow. So for comparative purposes, you can see where we think we're going to fall compared to those two levels. And then on the bottom, I tried to grab a couple of snowtail sites that were in or at least near each basin that was somewhat representative of the basin that I'm talking about. And there's a New Fork Lake and East Rim Divide on both of these. These snow plots, I think most of you have seen, but just a reminder, the average flow, or I mean, sorry, the average snow accumulation and melt is shown in the blue line. The median is in the purple line. And then last season is in the red. The green is the current season. I try to find similar years, at least they're years that were very close to the current observation, and plot those on there along with the observed peak flow for that particular year. So on the right, you can see at New Fork Lake, we were really close to 1986 as far as the current flow, and the runoff at that resulted that year was around 18,800 CFS as a mean daily flow. In 1986, of course, we extended the melt out. It took a while to come off, and it came off quite quickly at the end there. So, no indication how this is going to really come off, but these are just kind of for comparative purposes and to see. It's a nice little reality check to see where our forecasts are in relation to similar years. Looking at the East Rim Divide, 2011 was a good year to compare against, and it came out around 13,000. So we're forecasting 12.5. Again, the flood is 11.5. Just feel pretty good that this area may see some flows that could potentially get at or above the flood stage. Next up, we'll take a look at the Yampa River Basin, looking at Steamboat Springs. You can see the forecast actually increased a little bit from the mid-April forecast, and the probability is the forecast 50% probability is around 4,500 CFS, almost double, a little under double what we had last season. Still below the flood flow, but at the 10% exceedance level, we're touching that flood flow. So again, situation may really change dramatically as we move into the spring, but that kind of flags you a little bit. A couple comparative years. It was a little tough to get comparative years down here because we did see in 2011 and 1996 a lot of accumulation after this point in time, and you can see the associated flows, peak flows that occurred on those years. But the current one matches up pretty good with the 1996. Next up in the same basin, the Elk River near Milner. Again, this forecast also went up a little bit, and at a greater than 10% exceedance probability, we're above the flood flow. 5,000 CFS, the flood is 5750, average 3865. 2008 and 2005 at the Lost Dog Snowtail site, which hasn't really been around long enough for us to be able to plot a median or an average for this site, but it matches up pretty good with the comparative years there, especially 2008. You can see the flow was around 5,700 for the peak on that one. And on the years where we actually accumulated quite a bit more, in 2011, a little bit higher peak was observed on that for that point. Next up, Colorado Cameo. Again, a slight increase here, and this is also one of these that the forecast distribution is exceeding or touching the flood flow at this point. We are looking at about 20,000 cubic feet per second. Again, this is a plot. The Snowtail plot is actually a group of Snowtail sites above Cameo, and you can see a couple of years for comparative purposes. 2008 is it's falling right along 2008 right now. We ended up with around 22.5 on that one, so we feel pretty good about these forecasts right now. A couple of recreational points on the next one here. I have Green River, Utah, and Cataract Canyon. Again, showing the forecast 24,000. This was a slight increase at Green River, Utah since the mid-month, as well as the Cataract Canyon flow. You can see how much larger we are, over double what we had last year. So we're expecting quite a bit of runoff here. Again, these are also regulated points I just want to point out. So there's a lot of reservoir operation, either plans or assumptions that go into these. So if those change dramatically, then of course that's going to affect what we actually see down here in the river. Moving into the Animas River Basin, I didn't put any comparative peaks on here because the Animas is forecast below the average of 5780. We've really, as far as a group, the entire Snowtail up there tends to be pretty close to average. Red Mountain Pass is showing near the median. Some of the sites are showing a little bit above the historical average, the historical median, but we've kind of got a snow situation there that, at least at the higher elevation, seems to be a little bit closer or maybe slightly above average, but at some of the lower and mid elevations, it's a little bit below average. The Yellowstone River at Altona should be showing up here momentarily. It looks like I slowed down a little bit here. Okay, there we go. This is where we get into, we're kind of moving into an area where we have below average forecast. The Duchesne River Basin, especially on the east end, is not doing that well with the snow. You can see on the lower plots, I've got a couple of these where we did see a little bit of improvement in the snowpack in late March, but we really are still quite a bit below average, and the forecast peaks are showing that. A little bit better than last year, but we'll kind of have to see how that pans out. These are still fairly low flows. And then looking into northern Utah and the Bear River Basin, Logan River at Logan, it's kind of one we scratch our head a little bit. Our model is still suggesting a flow that's fairly close to average. It did come up a little bit from mid-month, and we're going to have to watch this one. We are indicating at least at the 10% and almost the 25% exceedance that the Logan will hit bank full. There's not a great distance in the flow between the actual average and the flood. We're talking only about 400 or so CFS. Looking at Tony Grove Lake in the Bear River Basin, which is usually a pretty good indicator for how the Logan reacts, we can see that the current snow water equivalent is pretty good there in this area, and a couple of similar years are plotted. As far as the snow traces go, 1984, you have to remember, was in the middle of a very wet period, and we actually have, we're looking back at a couple years with fairly dry soil moisture conditions, and we didn't really have all that wet of soil moisture conditions entering the winter. So I think that's part of the reason that the model is continuing to insist that this will not be a problem, but it is one we want to keep an eye on. In 1984, we did have a flow that was above the flood level, and in 1999, with kind of a similar snowpack, we did have a flow that ended up above the flood level. A couple things to point out about those years, though, was that melt was quite delayed, and you can kind of see that looking at the snow water equivalent plot. And we've got a ways to go. I think the Logan may be one of these that if we tend to stay cool and we tend to turn cool and we tend to delay the melt, into say mid-May, you may see this forecast start to go up. Weber River at Oakley, forecasting slightly below to near average at Weber at Oakley. Not a lot of change over the last couple months in this area. Snow water equivalent for the Basin headwater group is pretty close to the historical median and historical average. A little bit better than last year, and the flows are showing quite a bit peak flow forecast is quite a bit better than last year. So kind of near below average in the Weber. Next up, I believe I have Provo. Provo River at Woodland. The forecast for this site is, again, similar to the Weber, a little bit below average at this point in time, and slightly higher than last year. You can see the snow water equivalent better than last year. We're pretty much right on the median, historical median at this point, so we'll just have to see how that develops. And just to mention something about the time of peak, as we start getting closer to the actual peak flow period, recall, I think Ashley mentioned this, that on these plots I just showed you, these are really the long range outlooks. They don't actually give you the time that we're expecting the peak. We plot the normal time of peak on there, but we don't really tell you exactly when it's going to happen. We are a lot better, our abilities to do that are much improved as we get closer to that period. The temperature scenario that plays out and the forecast temperatures are going to be critical in identifying that time period. So as the peak nears on that list that you were shown earlier, we tend to try and indicate that it's either peaking soon or we indicate it's already occurred if it has. And we refer you to our daily forecast hydrographs that are on our webpage. And so when you get within about that 10 to 12 day period or 10 to 15 day period of the peak occurring, it's much better to start referencing those forecasts on a daily basis as well. We'll be feeding in 10 days of temperature forecasts and 5 days of precipitation forecasts. So this is the deterministic model, I guess, and that's what you will want to look at. And we'll do our best to try and point you towards that direction. So just a summary for the peak flow forecast. Those areas that we're expecting fairly good runoff, above average, and potentially some bankful, maybe even some flood problems, would include the Upper Green River in Wyoming, especially LaBarge in that area up above where we're exceeding the flood stage at the 50% forecast level. Yampa River headwaters, the Elk and Steamboat should be running really good, as well as some of the Colorado River headwaters, Eagle River above Cameo, above state and at state line. And then the Gunnison River, it's primarily on the East River that looks to be running pretty good, but that whole area should have decent runoff and decent flows. We're still suggesting I think we have a 10% forecast to exceed the flood stage at the Blue Mesa. And then the Logan River near Logan. Not forecasting a problem there right now, but definitely one we want to watch. I think it's important to mention also that the procedures they don't exist everywhere. We don't have every single stream indicated on our peak flow forecast graphic and list. There's always seems to be in these heavy snowpack areas small tributaries that tend to surface every year that may have some kind of issue. So just because in a certain area we may not be indicating a forecast for a particular smaller stream, it doesn't mean there may not be high runoff in that area. So that's just something to keep in mind. We kind of have a limited set of actual forecast points that we issue peak flows for. The spring weather impacts, we show this every year, but I think it's just important to keep in mind. We have had large snowpack years. 2011 is a great example where the melt just came out perfect. We really anticipated a lot of problems in that during that year. We were just loaded for bear to see problems. We had a late melt, but it just was a really slow warm up during June, and the water just came out kind of in pulses, kind of pulsed out as we got into a little bit of warm and a little bit of cool periods, and that eased the flood threat significantly. So the characteristics from day to day are determined by the spring weather from day to day. So it can really change quite dramatically. Small snowpack years can also have problems with the right sequence of spring temperatures, and especially if we see precipitation during the peak flow period. You just have reduced capacities in the stream, and if we get a rain event that comes in that's a little bit out of the norm with high freezing levels and that, we've had many years where we've seen some issues. So that's something we're really going to need to watch, I think, in these areas where we have the heavy snowpack this year is how much rain may play an event. But keep an eye on our web pages and the daily forecasts, as those should reflect the precipitation that is anticipated. So briefly, I will go over the upcoming weather for the next 2-3 weeks, and then we'll open it up for questions. Upcoming weather, the ridge that's over us now has brought us some much above average temperatures, and we've actually finally today started observing some rises in several areas. I saw some pretty good ones on the Yampa system this morning. Our model has been indicating this, and we've just been kind of waiting to see it happen. So we are seeing some melt and some streams starting to pick up with the warm temperatures this week. The ridge is starting to flatten, break down a little bit. That should lead to increased chances for precipitation over the next couple of weeks. There's a weak system. I kind of have it indicated on here, number one, a little closed low out there in the Pacific that's kind of going to open up and move through the southern part of our area over the weekend. Probably not going to bring a lot of precipitation. And it may merge with system number two, which is that area is still trying to get organized, and that couple models differ a little bit on how that's going to work out. But that looks like it should sag into our area kind of late in the weekend and bring some precipitation. Again, I doubt at this point we're not anticipating heavy precipitation. It's going to be more of a chance, and temperatures will probably drop back to either near or slightly above average. And then next week, this is beyond what you can see on this image, but the models are suggesting another storm system moving in. They're not together on how strong that will be, but basically we're getting into potentially a period of more unsettled weather, not untypical for April. In fact, the pattern that we're in right now, if we can get into like warm and then cool a little bit and then warm, is not something that's going to really work to increase, I guess, the stream flow forecasts and not worsen any flood threat situation. It's actually bringing the snow off in pulses is going to alleviate things, if anything else. Forecast precipitation for the weekend is on this graphic. Basically, if you kind of look where the heavier precip is in the CBRC area, it's in the same place that's always occurred, from the northern Bear River Basin up through the Upper Green and into the Colorado and the Gunnison. So nothing's changed if you look at the way the models want to handle this. So again, the areas that have the heavy snowpack look like we'll continue to see some precipitation, but these amounts right here are not really extremely heavy for this time of year. And then taking a look at the temperature outlook, this is I have a couple periods on here, April 14th through the 18th and the 16th through the 22nd. The above average area is in the darker red and oranges, and below average in the blue. We're really almost kind of at the transition zone. So I interpret this as not really a strong signal either way over much of the Upper Green and the Colorado mountains. Once you move further to the southwest, of course, you warm up. Utah probably near, maybe slightly above average, but it's bottom line, we're just kind of right at that transition over much of the area where we have the heavy snowpack. So I don't see a real strong temperature signal in this area. And based on the more unsettled weather, it looks more like seasonal temperatures. The 90-day outlooks I put on here as well. They're really not providing a lot of information, especially for peak flow. The precipitation shows no real signal one way or the other. The temperature continues to indicate warmer in the southwest, and over the peak flow areas that we're talking about today, really no strong signal into the 90-day period. As for future webinars, we will continue to and forecast, as Ashley mentioned, we'll continue to update the peak flows twice a month. So we'll do one here next week, probably sometime next week, middle of next week, and then again in early May. And the upcoming webinars, we'll have our next water supply one on May 6th, and the one after that's June 5th. And somewhere in there, we'll fit in a peak flow, probably in early May or as needed if conditions really dramatically change. So let me unmute this for any questions.
The conference is now in talk mode.
And if you have any questions, you're welcome. Okay, I've got a couple that were online. So let me read those real quick. This is from Tom Ryan. Do we have an overall compiled Upper Colorado River Basin peak flow forecast, percent of average? I'm not. Hey, Tom, are you on still?
Yes,
I'm not quite sure what you're looking for. Are you looking for just?
Have you developed a number that says, oh, it looks like we're, exactly normal this year. We're 100%, or we're, like you do on the snow.
Oh, I see. No, that's really kind of difficult because it can really vary so much from basin to basin. Maybe if they're all really low and we're really void of snow, but we have such a uh, weird distribution of snow. I don't say weird distribution of snow, but some areas we have way above average snow and some areas near average and others below. It'd be difficult to come up with, I think, a meaningful number to describe the entire basin. And
Okay.
part of our goal here is also to highlight these sites individually for how they might compare to their flood flow as well. So I think we might lose that if we tried to come up with such a number like that. So
Okay, thanks.
okay, and then I've got one more here. This is from Tilden. Are the Green River Jensen forecasts based on historical operations at Flaming Gorge, matching the peak to the Yampa, or the last 2 years operations based on timing of fish biology? Do you want to?
This is Ashley. The peaks made in April are based on the timing on the biological trigger. So we tried to incorporate that into the last forecast.
Okay. Tilden, did that answer your question okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Okay. Well, as you know, we're here at your disposal. You're more than welcome to email or call any of us if you want to follow up on any of this. Please do. Thanks for joining us.
Cool, thank you. Good thing I fixed that.
Wait till we stop recording. Where is it?